I never imagined that a family barbecue, something so commonplace and uniquely ours, would conclude with me out of breath, scything at the lake's surface while my grandson giggled. My dear Kyle, that was his former self anyhow. With a smile that stopped short of his eyes, he pushed me, his own grandma, into the ocean at the age of 19. It wasn't an error. It wasn't too much roughhousing. It was vicious, premeditated, and purposeful. Even before I felt the thrust, I could hear his words. "Grandma, hurry up, see whether you can swim as well as you used to." Then my back was touched by icy hands. A shove. I shouted as my body twisted, but it was too late. I stepped off the dock. Like a stone, I struck the water. My breath was taken away by the shock. My arms and legs went cold. I attempted to scream again, but all I managed to do was swallow more lake water, and my chest burned. It had been more than 30 years since I last went swimming. The doctor advised me not to take a chance after my operation, not with my failing coordination and fragile shoulder. However, nobody made a move. Nobody on that dock even batted an eye. As the water pulled me down, I struggled and flailed, panicking. I glimpsed their expressions as I arose, spluttering and choking. Kyle and his pals were laughing while he stood there with his arms folded. My daughter-in-law is drinking wine and saying, "She's being dramatic," while my son and his father are simply observing. I can't even recall how I managed to escape. I believe it was instinct, fear, or even a tiny power I was unaware I still possessed. My knees scraped raw and my heart pounded violently in my chest as I eventually crawled up to the dock, drenched and trembling. I got no help. Nobody. Kyle grinned as he glanced down at me. "You must be able to swim after all. What a tough old bird." They all chuckled. Long after the moment had ended, I could still hear that laughing. I refrained from screaming. I refrained from crying. I was so ashamed that I simply got up, water streaming from my clothing. "People show their true colors when they think you need them." Dolores' voice from last week flashed across my head at that moment. Wet and sore, I made my way back to the picnic table, as if nothing had occurred and I hadn't nearly passed out. From their amusement, they went back to cooking burgers and cracking open another bottle of wine. No apologies, no worries. I knew this was it, I thought. The wool eventually came off my eyes at this point. The instant I stopped trying to justify their actions. The instant I let go of the boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard as a child. Kyle had left. What replaced him was a youngster molded by those who prioritized appearance over compassion. Who could pass for confident if he taught him cruelty? Who gave him the impression that love had no repercussions? Silently, I sat in my soaked garments. It used to be thought that quiet was a sign of weakness. No more. This time, it was a warning, a promise, and a start. Because I noticed something, others didn't while I gazed at that pier while my family laughed, my body hurt, and my heart was broken. I still had options. The child lost track of who owned his future fund. I dried myself in the bathroom using a threadbare towel I usually saved for visitors, the one no one else touched, after returning home and peeling off my wet clothing. With my knees scraped, my hair knotted, and my eyes bloodshot from the lake water, I gazed at myself in the mirror. I appeared to be a ghost. Nevertheless, they were discussing holiday plans, joking about airfares to Cancun, and debating whether Airbnb had a better view when I returned to the kitchen. Nobody looked in my direction. Nobody inquired about my feelings. Not a single person gave a dry blanket. Kyle was barefoot, his wet bathing trunks creating little puddles on my spotless floor while he browsed through his phone. My kid was drinking the lemonade I had made that morning while leaning on the counter. And like it was just another bright afternoon, my daughter-in-law, that polished statue of indifference, was showing Kyle a slideshow of beach resorts. I seemed to be invisible. No one saw me sitting at the edge of the breakfast table with my cardigan glued to my back and my bones still trembling from the cold. Nobody gave a damn. It was amazement, not agony, that made me want to scream. How did we arrive here? God bless me, I do recall that period. "Grandma, you're the best part of this house," Kyle would remark, putting his arms around my neck. I Recall his little head leaning on my arm on Sunday mornings when we watched cartoons and ate pancakes. He now pretended to drown in front of his pals and chuckled as I gasped for breath. It took time for it to happen. They had to learn to be harsh. And I was certain of the source from which he got it. From the smirks and eye rolls to the occasions when his folks mocked my traditional ways and disregarded my worries. I became less of a person and more of a nuisance because of the way they utilized my house, money, and time, and the way they spoke about me while they thought I was asleep. Now, while they plotted their next escape, I sat in my own kitchen, trembling. I let the quiet to suffocate the air. Seeing if any of them would notice was my goal. They didn't. So, as usual, I stood quietly and composedly. After making my way to my bedroom, I softly shut the door and took a seat on the side of the bed, where I used to read Kyle stories before bed. My skin had lost the lake water, but my heart remained intact. That searing, that shame, that remained. And I came to the realization that I had been avoiding their actions for years. My birthday is often forgotten. Each time they requested money without expressing gratitude. Every time I was laughed at, talked over, and ignored. It pushes into the lake. They had never done it in public before. I wrote a single phrase in my journal after pulling it out. They will never have another opportunity to drown me. Because I wasn't simply drying off starting tonight. I was getting up. I sat by myself in my room, the door shut, long after the house had become silent. Beside me, the antique lamp hums faintly. I had trouble falling asleep. Not with Kyle. Like that. As I fought to remain afloat, my Kyle laughed. I was tormented by it. It was because he was, not because it was cruel. I didn't nurture the youngster as a devoted vacationer or only as a grandma. No, his parents couldn't be bothered, so I raised him. Guess where Kyle ended up when the bank knocked after his father's third job loss? At this residence. Inside, my arms. I read to him, gave him a bath, fed him, and soothed him during his night terrors. I filled out all the emergency contact forms with his name. When his parents couldn't afford it, he paid his tuition. I created his universe. The day he received his first piano keyboard is still fresh in my mind. I purchased it used from a retired music instructor. I bought it with half of my savings. And for hours, he sat on the floor, cross-legged, pressing each key as if it were magic. "This is better than Christmas, Grandma," he exclaimed. I recall thinking, this kid has a lot of feelings. That boy went where? I recalled how things began to change when he reached 16. He held the phone all the while. He got up from his chair at the table. His thank yous become growls, no longer making eye contact. I initially attributed it to aging. Teens may be temperamental. He still loves you, I reminded myself. He is simply developing. However, it wasn't it. He did not just develop. He changed. Small details revealed it. He rolled his eyes as I recounted stories and made crude remarks about how I stirred my tea. I should have said something then. I should have confronted him. But I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to lose him. Instead, I lost myself. I let him talk over me. I let his parents laugh when he dismissed me. I let myself fade into the wallpaper of my own home. The boy who once cried when I scraped my knee in the garden, who used to kiss my cheek and ask if angels aged, was now a stranger in my kitchen making jokes about drowning me. And maybe the worst part, I still wanted to believe there was some of that boy left. But tonight, I let that fantasy go. I closed the last photo album I had of him, pages of gap tooth, smiles and birthday candles, and put it on the shelf. Not to forget, but to protect myself, because love without boundaries isn't love. It's servitude, and I've served enough. Let his parents clean up what they created. Let them brag about his college applications, his Instagram followers, his sense of humor. The next morning, I told everything to Dolores because in that moment, I needed comfort. I needed someone who would just listen. And Dolores always did. Dolores has been my best friend for 30 years. We've weathered countless storms together, and she's been by my side through every high and low. The next morning, there was a knock at my kitchen door. Not the front one, never the front, Dolores had always come through the side like she owned the place. "Open up, Margaret. I brought muffins and opinions." I smiled before I even got to the door. There she was in her oversized sunglasses and turquoise windbreaker, clutching a brown paper bag and 2 coffee cups like she was storming a battlefield. I didn't even get a word out before she said, "You look like hell. Sit. I'll pour." I sat. Because with Dolores, you don't argue, you receive. "They did something," she said. "Didn't they?" I nodded, just once. That was all it took. She didn't gasp or say, "Oh, honey," like most people would. She leaned forward, planted her elbows on the table, and said, "Then it's time." "Time for what?" I asked. She pulled something from her bag. Not a muffin, not a napkin. A folder. My lawyer's card and a list of every account you told me about last year when we did your taxes. I stared at her. "You kept that?" "I keep everything," she said. "Especially when my best friend is handing out her love and legacy like Halloween candy to people who'd shove her into a lake." I looked down at the card. Peter Holloway. Estate law, clean font, firm handshake type. "I don't know," I said quietly. "It feels final." Dolores leaned back, crossed her arms, and tilted her head. "You want final? You just don't want guilt. That's different." She took a sip of her coffee and tapped the table. "Listen to me. You paid for Kyle's school. You paid for his braces, his damn piano, his soccer trips. You let his parents live rent-free in your lake house one whole summer, and you still had to buy your own groceries that August." "I wanted to help," I murmured. "I know you did. You're better than them. That's the problem." I stared out the window. The azaleas were blooming. Cliff planted them for our anniversary. He always said they were stubborn flowers, slow to open, but impossible to kill. I felt like that now. "I don't want revenge," I said. Dolores reached across and squeezed my hand. "Of course not. You want release." And she was right. I didn't want to scream or burn the house down or march into Kyle's room and demand an apology he didn't even believe I deserved. I wanted the peace that comes when you finally stop begging to be seen. Dolores stood and pulled me up by the eye. "Shoulders. We're going into town. You're going to eat something that didn't come out of a box, and then we're calling Peter." "I haven't been to that cafe in months," I admitted. "Perfect," she said, grabbing her keys. "Let them see what strength looks like in cardigans and crow's feet." As we drove, windows down, the wind tangled in my thinning hair, I realized something simple, something that stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't felt this alive in years, and all it took was someone reminding me I was still mine. The cafe was crowded, the clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation wrapping around me like a worn quilt. Dolores stirred sugar into her espresso with purpose, like she was mixing a potion, then slid the second cup across the table to me. "Drink up. You're going to need backbone and caffeine." She wasn't wrong. We had called Peter Holloway right after lunch. He told me to come in that afternoon. Said, "Bring everything you've got, and don't sugarcoat it." I didn't. I brought the original trust documents, the binder Cliff and I had assembled after his stroke, and a folded copy of the university fund letter back when Kyle was still in middle school, still excited to show me his report cards. I remembered printing that letter. How proud I was, how hopeful. $50,000, I murmured as Peter flipped through it. I started putting it aside when he was 10. Birthday money, bonuses, tax returns, even skipped a vacation one year. Cliff and I agreed. Education first. Peter looked up from the papers, brows furrowed. "It's all still there, untouched. He hasn't needed it yet." "No," I said, voice hollow. "He's in community college right now. Says he wants to transfer next year." That was always the plan until he decided I didn't belong on a dock or in his life. Peter didn't ask questions. He just nodded like a surgeon would before operating. "What do you want to do, Margaret?" he asked. "Change the beneficiary, redirect the funds, close it entirely?" I stared at the ceiling for a moment, then whispered, "Nothing. Not yet." Peter raised an eyebrow. "I want to watch," I said. "I want to see how they treat me when they think I'm frail, when they believe they're this close to inheriting. I want to see who pretends to care and who actually shows up. He closed the file slowly. That's cold. It's survival. Dolores leaned in. We're not burning bridges today, Peter. We're just checking which ones were never real in the first place. Peter smiled faintly. Fair enough. We left his office an hour later with everything legally intact, but my perspective permanently shifted. That fund wasn't a gift anymore. It was a mirror. I spent the rest of the evening at home, walking from room to room like I was inspecting a life I no longer lived in. I paused by the mantel where Kyle's baby photo still stood. Those dimples, that grin, that sense of safety. Didn't take it down. I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a fresh page in my journal. At the top, I wrote, "Let's see who loves me without the money." Underneath that, I made 2 columns, who notices and who avoids. Kyle's name didn't even have to be written. I already knew where it would end up. This wasn't vengeance. This was clarity. Because for all their planning, for all their whispered schemes about who would get what when I was too tired to manage it, they forgot one thing. I still have the pen, and I'm not done writing the ending. I started small. A stumble here, a slower step there. I'd pause mid-sentence and touch my forehead like I forgot what I was saying. I let my hands tremble a little when pouring tea, just enough to make the cup rattle against the saucer, and the effect was immediate. Not concern, not kindness, annoyance. Kyle stopped saying hi when he walked in the door. Now it was just a grunt. If I asked for help carrying groceries in, he'd sigh so loudly you'd think I'd asked him to lift a car. My son Daniel started whispering in the kitchen when he thought I was asleep. She's getting worse. I don't think she's taking her meds. I can't keep cleaning up after her. His wife Paula, always quick to put on a concerned face around church friends, didn't even bother behind closed doors. She left the stove on again, she said one night, too loudly and too falsely. That's dangerous, Dan. What if Kyle was here alone? He was always here alone, but no one ever worried about him. The thing is, I never left the stove on. I checked it twice, then again before bed. But I didn't argue. I just let them believe it. Let them build their case for my decline. They thought they were playing chess. They didn't realize I was playing a longer game. At night, I would lie, in bed and listen to the muffled voices through the wall. They never said my name. Just her and she. She needs help. She's becoming a burden. She doesn't even know how to keep track of her own money. That last one nearly made me laugh out loud. I kept the ledgers in my sock drawer. Every transaction, every account balance to the penny. The university fund still untouched. The home equity still in my name. And yet, they counted me out like I was already gone. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Kyle and Paula at the table whispering. They froze when they saw me, but not before I heard the word facility. Kyle looked at me like I was an object. She didn't hear that, he said. I poured my coffee slowly, let the silence settle thick between us. I stared out the window at the garden cliff I had built from nothing. Our sanctuary. The hydrangeas were blooming again. Stubborn things, just like us. I'm old, I said aloud to no one in particular. But I'm not deaf. Neither of them responded. That's when I knew they were trying to push me out before I could draw a boundary. So I'd let them keep thinking I was slipping. Let them talk. Let them whisper. I made myself smaller in their eyes so that soon I could disappear entirely, and when I did, they'd feel that silence like thunder. That night, I opened my journal again, drew a little line next to Kyle's name. In the Who Avoids column, underlined it twice. Next to Daniel and Paula's names, I wrote, They want the house, not the woman in it. I closed the book and smiled in the dark. Let them whisper because I was listening to every word. A week later, I had the last moment that pushed me over the line. It was Paula's idea. Some kind of casual dinner for her friends from the yoga studio and Daniel's work buddies. We'll grill. Keep it light. Maybe you can make that lemon cake they love. I said nothing. I baked the cake anyway. Out of habit. Maybe out of sentiment. But I didn't plan on staying long. The house smelled like grilled meat and rosé perfume. Laughter spilled from the back patio like smoke. Thin, rising, suffocating. I stayed in the kitchen, away from the crowd. No one noticed, not even Daniel, who used to peek in to ask if I needed help with the dishes when he was 12. I stood by the sink, just out of view, listening. Always listening. Then I heard Kyle's voice, loud, icy, dripping with that smug sarcasm he'd inherited from Paula. "So get this," he said to the circle of half-tipsy guests. "Grandma fell in the lake at the barbecue. She flailed around, like a flipped turtle. All, help me, help me." Laughter. Real, belly-deep laughter. He kept going, and I'm like, "Dude, you're not actually drowning." She was probably angling for sympathy. You know how old people are. They weaponize helplessness. Someone chuckled and muttered, "That's dark, Kyle." Kyle laughed harder. "Nah, she's fine, tough old bird, tough old bird." That's what he saw when he looked at me, not the woman who paid for his braces, not the one who stayed up nights with him during his asthma spells, not the one who kept every damn drawing he ever made in a binder under her bed. Just a bird. I stood frozen behind the sliding glass door, my hands trembling. Not from age, but rage. Then I heard Paula's voice, soft and cutting like a scalpel. "She's a liability," she said. "Not family," I told Daniel. "We need to think about the future, not sentiment. Liability. It wasn't the first time I'd felt disposable. But this time, it was final. I walked to my room calmly, not a single tear, not a word to them. I sat down on the bed, the voices muffled by the closed door, and I felt something shift in me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was done. It was the clarity I'd been waiting for, the confirmation, the signature on the invisible contract they'd written the day Kyle pushed me into that lake. I opened my bedside drawer and pulled out the envelope with Peter's card. I picked up my phone and stared at the number. Then I dialed. "Peter Holloway," he answered on the second ring. "It's Margaret. I'm ready." He didn't ask what I meant. He just said, "Come in tomorrow. Bring the documents. Bring your ID." I said, "I already have." When I hung up, I walked back into the hallway. The sound of their laughter was fainter now, like it belonged to strangers. The lemon cake still sat untouched on the counter. I took a knife and cut one perfect slice. Not for them, for me. I sat at the kitchen table alone and ate it slowly. Let them tell their stories. Let them drink and toast and gossip. Let them pretend I was invisible. Because starting tomorrow, they'd die. Find out just how invisible I could become. And when the silence came, real silence, it wouldn't be weakness. It would be my exit. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the small desk in my room, the same one I used to help Kyle write his college essays on, and opened my laptop. The website for the Scholarship Foundation was already bookmarked. Cliff and I had supported them for years. It was quiet, efficient, and noble. Their motto, "Education should be earned, not inherited." I typed steadily, deliberately. Amount to donate, $50,000. Donor name, in memory of Clifford James Walker. Designation, STEM Scholarship Fund for first-generation students. Anonymous, yes. Before I clicked, confirm, I paused. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought of Kyle, at 9 years old, grinning with missing teeth, saying, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to make machines that help people breathe better." He doesn't say things like that anymore. He doesn't say anything at all. Confirm. It was done. No second login needed. No confirmation email to wait for. Just a clean, permanent transfer. I closed the tab and didn't look back. Then I opened another window. Amtrak this time. One-way ticket. Departure. Sunday. Destination, Silver Pines, a quiet retirement community 2 states away. Dolores had a friend there who described it as peaceful but not dead. It had a garden, a shared workshop, and residents who played chess, without cheating. Perfect. I picked the earliest morning train, quiet, unnoticed. While the house slept, I packed lightly. One small suitcase, 3 sweaters, my gardening gloves, Cliff's flannel, the leather journal, and a photo of me holding baby Kyle, just one. The valuables were already gone, the documents already secure. What I left behind were just shells, clothes I hadn't worn in years, kitchen appliances they never thanked me for using, birthday cards with my handwriting that got tossed into drawers. Let them keep all that. Let them sort through my old life, like vultures circling something they helped kill. I'm heading out this weekend with Dolores, I said, standing in the kitchen doorway Friday evening. She wants company on a little road trip. Daniel didn't even look up from his phone. Cool, Kyle muttered, brushing past me on his way to the fridge. Paula was the only one who responded, and even then it was a hollow, distracted, drive safe, while she folded laundry, like she was more worried about mixing whites and colors than my actual departure. Not one of them asked where. Not one asked why. Not a single person offered to carry my bag. And I realized this wasn't just neglect, it was calculation. They were done pretending. In their minds, I had already been boxed up, labeled, and shelved. Grandma's just old. She probably won't be around much longer. I could practically hear their thoughts. Let her go. We'll be here when the will reads out. The suitcase sat by the front door all evening. I watched them glance at it. Not one of them asked when I'd be back. They probably assumed I wouldn't. And honestly, they were right. The only false note in this trip was that I called it a weekend. But I wasn't coming back. Not to this house. Not to these people. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the walls. Walls that had once been filled with Kyle's laughter, with handprints from painting projects, with Cliff humming while he fixed the molding. Now they were silent, cold, watching me go. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. I moved like I was slipping. Through time, brushed my hair, folded the blanket on my bed, wrote nothing, said nothing. Dolores pulled up at 6 Gao, sharp, headlights low, engine rumbling like a secret ready to be kept. I stood for a moment in the living room, looking at the house that had held my life and the people who slowly drained the meaning out of it. There was no pain, only space. I walked out the front door, suitcase in hand, closing it quietly behind me. No one stirred. Not even Kyle. As Dolores drove toward the station, she glanced at me. They didn't ask where you were going, did they? I shook my head. Didn't even look up. She made a noise in her throat. A bitter chuckle, maybe. Imagine that. You disappear and no one even notices. I prefer it this way, I said. And I did. At the train station, we hugged. Dolores pressed a small envelope into my hand. Just in case, she said. I nodded. We didn't cry. Women like us, who've seen births and deaths and the spaces in between, we don't cry over freedom. The train pulled in with a low roar. I boarded with my small suitcase and sat by the window. As the town faded behind me, replaced by trees and sky and the unknown, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for decades. This wasn't a getaway. It was a rebirth. And back in that quiet house, they wouldn't even notice I was missing until the towels ran out, the freezer was empty, and the woman they once called Grandma had stopped being convenient. They didn't see me off, but they'd feel my absence. And that's a goodbye they'd never forget. Silver Pines was quiet. Not the lonely kind of quiet, the peaceful kind. Birdsong in the morning, shuffling slippers in the hallway. The soft murmur of classical music from the neighbor's unit. My room was small but clean. A bed by the window, a bookshelf, a chair that didn't creak when I sat in it. I hung Cliff's flannel on the hook by the door. I set the photo of Kyle as a baby by the windowsill, not as an invitation for memories, but as a monument. I looked at that photo and finally saw the truth. He was just a boy I loved, not a man who deserved to own me. That afternoon, I sat at the desk and began the letter. Not to Kyle alone, to all of them, Daniel, Paula, and Kyle. I wrote their names at the top like it was an obituary. And then I began. I was the one who stayed up when Kyle couldn't sleep. I was the one who paid for his school, his shoes, his future. I was the one who never missed a birthday, even when you forgot mine. I listened. I waited. I hoped. And in return, you mocked my fear. You minimized my needs. You treated my presence like clutter. You laughed when I drowned. I stopped writing for a moment and placed my hand over my heart. It wasn't racing, not like it used to when I confronted them out loud. It beat calmly, steady. I picked the pen back up. This isn't vengeance. I'm not punishing you. But I will no longer fund people who see my love as leverage. The university fund is gone. The inheritance will follow. I've given enough. And now I choose peace. At the bottom, I didn't write "Love, Grandma." I signed my full name, Margaret Elizabeth Walker, because that's who they forgot existed. Not just Grandma, not just Mom, but a woman, a full one. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope with no return address. I included no gifts, no money, no photos, just truth. I walked to the post office at the corner, mailed it first class, and didn't look back. On the way home, I stopped at the garden. A few of the residents had started a small patch of vegetables. An older man was planting tomatoes, his hands deep in the soil. He looked up and nodded. "First year here?" "Yes," I said. "Good place," he said simply. "No one asked you to prove your worth here." I smiled, truly smiled. That's why I came. When I got back to my room, I made a cup of tea and watched the wind move through the trees. I didn't check my phone. I hadn't brought one. If they needed to talk, they'd have to do it without tracking, without expectation, because I had said all I needed to say, and this time they'd have to sit with it. It took exactly 5 days. 5 days from when I mailed that letter to when the first ripple hit. Peter told me afterward, in one of his rare chuckling emails, that Daniel came into the office looking, quote, 10 years older and 20 pounds of panic lighter. Apparently, the letter had arrived at breakfast. Kyle opened it, expecting maybe a check, a sentimental note, or instructions on how to claim his money. Instead, he found my handwriting laid out like a mirror. No screaming, no begging, just facts. And the T, one line that probably knocked the air out of him. The university fund is gone. Redirected to a foundation that values decency over entitlement. Peter said Kyle turned red. Paula started swearing, and Daniel kept repeating the same thing like a broken record. But we thought she'd wait. Wait for what? To be respected? To be useful enough? To be dead? No. I had done enough waiting. That day, Peter delivered the rest. Official documents, confirmation that the fund was no longer theirs to claim, that I had removed all digital access, that all correspondence now had to go through him. "I'm afraid she's listed herself as unreachable," Peter told them. "She's well within her rights." I didn't hear their screaming, but I could imagine it. Paula pacing the kitchen, furious that her careful planning just fell apart. Daniel rubbing his temples, realizing that his fallback plan vanished. And Kyle, poor Kyle, realizing that mocking someone into silence doesn't work when that someone leaves the room entirely. No email, no phone number, no address, just absence. That evening, I sat on my new little balcony with a blanket over my knees, tea in hand, watching a pair of sparrows argue over a flower pot. It was peaceful. Not quiet in the lonely way, but the earned kind of quiet. The kind you sit inside because you've done the screaming already. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't wonder if I'd gone too far, because for the first time, the distance between us was honest. I had not disappeared. I had withdrawn. They wanted me quiet, small, compliant. Now they had it, just not in the way they expected. No more help with bills, no emergency loans, no last-minute babysitting, no college fund, just silence, just space. And me, Margaret Elizabeth Walker, still breathing, still living, just elsewhere. They'd call it abandonment. They'd tell people I lost it, that I ran away. Let them. Because someday, when the dust settles, they'll remember that I gave everything until it nearly killed me. And then I stopped. Not because I was cruel, but because I finally understood. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep people warm. and I refused to be their matchstick ever again. Peter forwarded me the first email 3 days later. Subject line: urgent. Please call us, Mom. It was from Daniel, full of panicked sentences and poor punctuation. We just need to talk. We're not mad. We're just really confused. We didn't know you were upset. Kyle's distraught. Please just let us explain. Explain what? That I imagined the water in my lungs? That I misunderstood their laughter? That being called a liability wasn't what it sounded like? They didn't want to talk. They wanted access. Peter asked if I wanted him to reply. I told him no. Let them sit in the echo of their own silence. That same week, they called the bank, tried to access accounts, denied. They emailed the scholarship. Foundation, denied. And then came the boldest move yet. They reported me missing. An officer actually showed up at Peter's office asking if there was any concern for my safety. Peter, bless him, handed over the documentation. Margaret Walker is of sound mind, left by choice, and is under no legal obligation to inform people she's protecting herself from. They tried again the next day, this time with Kyle calling. Peter didn't answer. He sent me an update with the subject line: they're scrambling. I didn't open it right away. I sat with the knowledge, not because I needed to enjoy their panic, but because I needed to believe in my right to walk away. There's a strange guilt that settles in when you stop mothering people who've grown addicted to your silence. It comes in waves. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe they'll change. But guilt is just the price you pay when you've been taught that love should hurt. And I'm not paying that price anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. Instead, I spent the day in the garden, digging my fingers into warm soil and planting seeds, like I was daring the earth to begin again with me. That evening, Dolores called. They're spiraling, she said. Words getting around. Paula's yoga friends are starting to whisper. One of them asked if you had dementia. I laughed. Not the polite kind, the freeing kind. Well, I said, I must be the most organized dementia patient they've ever seen. Dolores paused. You sure you're okay with them thinking you're gone? I stared out the window at the sun setting over a bed of marigolds. I'm not gone, I said. I'm just not available. Because that's the truth, isn't it? They wanted me to be a quiet fixture in the background, always ready, never needed, convenient, disposable. Now I'm gone, but not missing. They didn't lose me. They drove me out. And now that they can't find me, they're finally trying to listen. But it's too late for conversations. This isn't a standoff, it's a departure. And for the first time, they're not the ones choosing when it ends. Peter called it the moment the floor gave out. He'd gathered them into his office, the three of them, because they refused to believe it until they heard it from someone with a title at a desk. Daniel came in, tight-jawed. Paula wore her best I'm about to play victim cardigan, and Kyle looked like a little boy again. Not because he felt remorse, but because for the first time, the world wasn't bending to him. As I had instructed, Peter had drafted a brief statement. Just the facts, no chit-chat, no justifications. He glanced at each of them, passed the folder across the table, and said, "This is from Margaret Walker." Then he read, "I gave everything once to those who thought my silence indicated consent. I'm not going to die twice. You stole my quiet, my house, and my leisure. While you claimed to be taking care of me, you depleted me. When I drowned, you made fun of me and then asked why I didn't come up gasping for your approval. So let me clarify. The university fund has been depleted. There has been a restructuring of the inheritance. The home will be given away. Those who regarded me like trash that needed to be cleaned out will not receive my assets." Peter held up a hand as Daniel reportedly attempted to interrupt. "She gave me full authority to read every word. You gave me nothing of worth in life. Not love, not respect, not care," he said, "so you will receive nothing from me in death. More than you loved me, you loved my money. The money is now in the hands of people who still value compassion." Peter claims that Paula became crimson and then white. No one paid attention to what Kyle mumbled beneath his breath. Daniel got up and said, "She's lost her mind," according to Peter, who told me, "No, She found it. Later that week, Peter emailed me the entire transcript, which I read leisurely while drinking tea in the garden and keeping my feet beneath a blanket that Dolores had knitted. Each syllable was like oxygen, like breath. It wasn't retaliation. The time has come for reckoning. The tale was theirs. I just finished reading the last page. I was to fade softly, give eternally, and forgive silently in their universe. However, I didn't. I said something. I went out. Instead of giving my affection to people who expected it, I gave it to those who still desired it. According to my handwritten note, Peter had bolded my last sentence. Being alone is better than being used at the bottom of the statement. That was the end of it. In the soothing fluorescent light of a legal office, the inheritance illusion died there. With honesty, not with a boom. They left in silence, not because they understood, but rather because they were at a loss for words. They had lost control. The echo of all they had taken for granted was all that remained. I didn't have to be present to witness it. It's advisable to see certain endings from a distance. According to Dolores, it began with a door being slammed. Kyle returned from the financial office of his institution with a mouthful of blame and a folder full of bad news. "Nobody told me the money was gone," he yelled. Paula said, "Maybe if you hadn't laughed when she almost died, you'd still have a future funded." As if he could force a better history out of his mind, Daniel simply stood there massaging his temples. After that, Kyle didn't return to class. And he finally realized that the scholarship office had verified the fund was no longer in existence when his reimbursement check failed to arrive. He received no punishment. He was just left out. Dolores described the sidelong stares at church and the hushed whispers at the grocery store. She informed me over the phone, "They said you disappeared, but I refuted them." "Oh," I said, grinning into my cup. "I pulled out of a toxic business." I had to put down the cup because I was laughing so much. The spiral deepened back at the lake home in the meantime. Daniel resumed his drinking habits, starting with a little amount, a beer with supper, followed by wine and whiskey. According to Paula's complaint to her sister, Mom's disappearance ruined everything. Never once did they mention the word left. I remained a ghost to them, haunting their story. I was always a figure who owed them more, not a woman who made her own decisions. However, their deed was short-lived by the community. As soon as Peter verified that I was still alive and healthy and had lawfully transferred all of my business, word quickly spread. At potlucks, old acquaintances, who had once nodded courteously at Paula, now avoided her. No more invites to speak at men's breakfasts, just hollow grins from churchgoers. It was the truth, not scandal, that caused their image to deteriorate. People begin to remember things when you make fun of a lady in public and devalue her in private. When Kyle's parents couldn't raise him, someone else did. Who took out small loans to pay for their vacations? Who never asked for gratitude, provided flowers to every wedding, and baked at every funeral? Me. And I was gone now. Their social network did not disintegrate. Without them, things just turned. I didn't need to yell. I was not required to defend. I just ceased making contributions. After Kyle dropped out, his pals started to drift away. His phone, which had been a continuous source of criticism, remained face down more and more. The home used to smell like my lemon cake, but now Daniel and Paula's arguments were louder and could be heard everywhere. The refrigerator was frequently empty. The mail was piling up. Dolores phoned one evening and claimed to have heard Paula yelling on the porch, saying something along the lines of, "How dare she take everything?" I didn't take everything, though. I left the stillness, the dishes, the curtains, and the keys behind. They still had one another. But I believe they are beginning to see that they enjoyed my silence because it allowed me to bear the burden of their dysfunction. It's their weight now. And folks who say please and thank you without expecting anything in return are all around me while I sit on my balcony with a warm drink in my hand and the sun shining on my face. It is no longer my responsibility to fill the stillness, so let them sit in it.